Apple say that if you have a 130 to 200mm wrist when you measure it like this, then you should go for the smaller wrist size. But if you have 140 to a 220mm wrist, you should go for the bigger one. My wrist size fits right in the middle of both of those. So technically, I can wear either of these watches. I decided to try both of the models for a week. I'd use them going to work, I'd use them going for walks in my free time, and then afterwards I'd decide which one I wanted to keep. In this video, I'm gonna show how the watches look and feel on my wrist, and then I'm gonna have a look at the differences in screen size. I'm also gonna look at the differences in battery life. Afterwards, I'll talk a little bit about the price, and then I'll finish by talking about the band choices you have on either of these devices, because there are some specific bands that fit specific cases. I know that the hardware inside both of these watches are exactly the same, so my decision really hinged on which one I felt most comfortable to use. So the first section is most important. I'd say the last four weren't that important to me. So my upfront conclusion is that as someone with a smaller wrist, the 40mm is quite perfect for me because I can still do all of my day-to-day activities, and I don't think it gets in the way as much as the bigger screen size does. Having said that, it's still a bulky watch and it still gets in the way. It's like wearing a G-Shock around. Also, I don't think the difference in screen size is really that much of a trade-off because, as I'll describe later in the video, I think functionally, you still see the same amount of information on both the screens. It's just that the bigger one just looks a little bit prettier. Previously, I had a Series 3 Apple Watch and that was a 42mm. I came to a slow realization that watch was just a little bit too bulky for me because quite often, whenever I'd go out, I would take the watch off and leave it on the side, or it just would stay on my bedside table or wouldn't even come with me in the first place. I didn't want to make the same mistake twice, and that's why I went through this whole effort of doing this experiment in the first place. First things first, I got a tape measure and I measured my wrist size. My wrist size is 160mm. 160mm also happens to be the wrist size that a lot of people online tend to be quite indecisive about because that's just right in the middle of that range I was talking about earlier. The difference in dimensions are 4mm in width and 4mm in height, and I think that's a very interesting amount because on a wrist, 4mm really adds up, like it gets to quite a lot. I don't know if you can see that very well. So how did it feel to wear? The 40mm felt more comfortable than a 44mm because I didn't find that the watch spilled over my wrist as much. There's a sense of freedom when you're wearing a smaller watch because it doesn't catch onto the cuffs of the jackets and the sweaters that you wear. But with both watches, I still get those uncomfortable moments where I have to decide whether to slip the watch under my jacket sleeve or place it in front. This has always been a problem I've had with Apple Watches. I just find that they're a bit too thick to wear on a day-to-day basis. So I can't wait for the day that a smartwatch is really as thin as a normal watch is. Talking about the thickness, both of these watches are exactly the same. The watches measure 10.4mm in thickness. 10.4mm is thinner than most G-Shocks, if that's a useful reference for you. I know I used to wear G-Shock when I was in school, so that was ridiculous when I'd wear it to school, but this feels just a little bit less ridiculous. What else can I say? I've really enjoyed the new curved design that they've got in the Series 6 Apple Watches. The ones before this were just a little bit more rectangular. I think the curved design just really slips onto your wrist and doesn't catch as much as the older designs would have done. So I really like that. Like I've said already, I just think the 44mm was just a little bit annoying to use on a day-to-day basis, and I would prefer to use a smaller watch. Comfort to one side, let's just jump into the stats of both of these. The difference in screen size is about 1/4 of an inch when measured diagonally, but everything else, like the always-on display and screen resolution, they're exactly the same. Aesthetically, the larger screen looks nicer than the smaller screen does, but I found that functionally, these are probably exactly the same. What I mean by that is, even though the 44mm has more pixels on the screen, there's only so much information you can fit onto your wrist. The amount of stuff that you see is near enough identical. When I'm scrolling through my mail, or when I'm scrolling through stocks or whatever it is, I find that I see the same amount of information. I don't consider myself any better off using the 44mm than I would with a smaller Apple Watch. Up next is the battery life. Both of these Apple Watches last for 18 hours a day. I charge both of these Apple Watches overnight, and I charge it at my bedside table. I take it with me to work, I'd use it throughout the day, I'd come back, and it's never run out of battery. Even though the 44mm has a larger battery, I don't think it's that important for two reasons. The first reason is that the 44mm has a larger display to power, so a larger battery is probably in order. The second reason is that I think your battery drain is more important than your battery capacity. And what I mean by that is, if you're using your Apple Watch to make loads of phone calls, if you're using the Bluetooth function a lot, if you're using the speakers quite a lot, you're gonna drain that battery a lot faster. If you're quite conservative, like I am, I don't use it for all of those features and I don't use that all of the time, you're gonna get on just fine. The bottom line is, the smaller Apple Watch has more than enough battery life. Like, even if I decided to do those things I just said, I think it still lasts me. So yeah, I've had no issues with that. The price of these Apple Watches brand new are £379 for the smaller one and £409 for the bigger one. You probably know that already, you can find that on the Apple website, but what you might not know is that if you decided to buy a second-hand Apple Watch that was in mint condition but not quite brand new, you'd have a very different experience with the prices. If you're confident enough to go online and buy something second-hand, then you could probably pick up this Apple Watch for as little as £270 like I did. You can pick up the bigger Apple Watch for as little as £320. So there is some saving in going second-hand and buying your units off of Facebook, eBay or Gumtree, but you've got to be really safe with it. The price really isn't as important as I once thought it was. I didn't feel any more attracted to getting the smaller one because the price was that much better. The difference in price was actually quite reasonable. I'm going to make my decision based on which one I think I'm going to get along with the best. The final thing I want to mention is that there are specific bands to specific cases, because for the first time Apple used 14-44mm for their sizing rather than 38mm and 42mm. So there's a few of these sizes, like I'll put them up on the screen now. The band choices that were offered weren't ones that I wanted anyway, but that's besides the point, because I get my Apple bands not from Apple. I'll buy my Apple bands from third-party sellers, so it means that I have so much more choice of bands, they last just as long, and they're designed to fit the exact Apple Watch. I don't need to be worried about trying to fit old official genuine bands to my new Apple Watch, because Apple are already rinsing me for enough money as it is. I'm not going to give them any more for a stupid rubber band. So what I learned from this experience is that, firstly, bigger is not always better. I think I used to have this previously held belief that I had to get the biggest of everything because it would add some kind of value in some way, like getting a bigger iPad or getting a bigger laptop, whatever it might be. The screen real estate is where it's at. But I've decided now that using the smaller version is much easier for me than using the bigger version. I get exactly what I need out of it, and it doesn't get in the way of my day-to-day life. So now that I've been using it for a week, some of the things I actually use my Apple Watch for are things like Apple Pay for setting reminders and transcribing notes. I use the phone feature quite a bit. I also use it as a general tool to stay off of my phone. So I might have my phone on charge on the other side of the room, but have my Apple Watch with me so that I'm still connected without having the temptation to scroll through Instagram or scroll through Facebook. The second thing I will finish by saying is you should lose the perception of his and hers, because it doesn't run like that. Like, the reason why you go for a smaller Apple Watch is because it fits your wrist size. The watches are exactly the same. It comes down to your personal preference on whether you want to go big or you want to go small. And yeah, so I hope it helps someone. Thank you very much for watching.